we go.
All right, hold on. Here we go. I'll come in here. All right, folks. Here we are back with Rooster Cogburn, best marshal that ever was. That Clarence Benish from Pawnee, Oklahoma, owner of the Buffalo Theater, and he's also a professor at the Pawnee College. We're going to play some spaghetti westerns. He's going to regale you with some tales of history from around here and a little bit of himself. I'm going to just give it up to Mr. Rooster Cogburn here, and he can take it from there. I'll turn down that music a little bit.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, Scott. That was Scott Trotter, and I tell you, he's a fine man. He has the Whiting Hotel here in downtown Pawhuska. I've been staying here. I love them rooms. All there. If you want history, you come here. Well, or Pawnee. We got a little bit more. But they're both very historic towns because they're capitals of Indian nations. And not just any Indian nations. The Pawnee and the Osage. They got to be my two favorite. But I was telling a pilgrim over here, he asked me about the Pawnees and the Comanches. And I think I'll start with that story. Because it has a modern day twist to it. But I read this from the Pawnee history and I was saying that the Pawnees love to steal horses from their enemies. In fact, to this day, if your last name is Horse Chief, well, that meant that somewhere in your lineage, you had an excellent horse stealer ancestor who could come home with 50 or maybe even more horses from the enemy. And as I told them, when they went to horse stealing, they walked to where they were going to do it. They even walked to battles because they figured they were going to win and come back with more horses. So he was asking me, did they ever have any encounters? Well, this is a true story from the Pawnee historical documents. And it goes like this. These two boys were out, the rite of passage was to go out when you're about 14 to 16, 18 at the most, and go steal some horses. And the more ferocious the tribe, the higher the honor. Of course, the horses got to look good, too. They got to be good horse flesh. And as most Indians are, and even to this day, they're good judges of horse flesh. So these two boys went out. Well, they spotted a Comanche village. And they thought, well, this will be a grand prize. Now, they were at war. They were at war. So if they were spotted by those Comanches, they were going to be a battle. 2 against a village, and that wouldn't be too good odds. But they were waiting up on a hill, and in the middle of the night, they snuck down to the middle of the camp where they saw some fine horses out there. Now, what they didn't know is that was the chief's teepee that they spotted those horses. So they go up to that teepee, and I think they get 3 or 4 horses. They had to leave one because they were leading them out in the middle of the night in the middle of this village. But in the process, the flap on the teepee comes open, and he spots this beautiful Comanche girl in that teepee. Well, she spotted him too. And she figured out, well, these must be Pawnees, because they're the only ones brave enough to do this. But after she had that thought, well, it's kind of like that Serena songs that we had earlier, all about love and crush and stuff. Evidently, there was an instant crush that developed in the middle of the night between these two warring tribes. So, the young man and his buddy, who was holding the other horses at the top of the hill, he goes up there. Now they've got 4 or 5 or 6, and that's enough to go on home with. He said, I can't go home right now. I got to go back and get that girl. And I want to make her my wife. And if I don't come back, that's because they killed me. Because I'm going to confront her father. Now, he didn't know her father was going to be the chief. He just thought, it was just a random teepee in the village. But he got the chief's daughter he's talking about. So, it's about daybreak. His buddy stayed with the horses up there and on the hill out of sight, and he goes back down there, and he walks right into that Comanche chief's teepee. And he got all alert. He said, "I'm Pawnee." Well, he knew that because of the scalp lock. "And I'm here for your daughter. You can either kill me or let me have your daughter." And the chief said something to the effect of, "Well, those are mighty bold words, but for a decision like that, I'm going to call a council. I'll call for a council." So he sends out a signal, and all the principal chiefs, the minor chiefs under his authority and from that village, they were summoned to meet there. We're going to have a council this first thing in the morning. So they all show up, and there's a Comanche boy in the corner there, and they think, "What's going on here? Did you catch a prisoner or something? We're going to decide how to torture him?" Because those Comanches were mean. So the principal chief told the other chiefs that they had to make a decision, had to help him make a decision. He said, "He wants my daughter, and if he doesn't get my daughter, then we can kill him." Now, you know, we value bravery above all things, and apparently the Pawnees know this, so he's driving a pretty hard bargain. Now, the tradition among the Comanches at the time, you took the pipe. It was the Americans and the white folks that called it the peace pipe, but you take that pipe and you circulate it among the other chiefs. And when they had the pipe, that was their permission to speak. So he'd give the pipe to the man next to him, the chief next to him. He says, "Let's hear your decision on this. How do you vote?" And he says, the first chief says, "I'm going to defer to your decision." And he passes the pipe to the next chief. And it goes all the way around. Each one of them saying, "I'm going to defer to your decision." And so the pipe came all the way back to the principal chief. And he said, "Well, you guys could have said something. You're leaving it all up to me." And of course his daughter probably, and I'm speculating this, his daughter probably looked at him with her sheepy eyes and love struck. And now remember that Pawnee boy's right there, and just a few feet from him. And he said, "Well, I think they're in love. So that means only one thing. We got to adopt this Pawnee. Adopt him into the tribe. That means you're going to have to live here. You want her as your wife, you can have her, but you got to live here." He said, "All right, I'll stay for a few months. But I got to go back and tell my family, but I'll come back again." He said, "All right, that sounds good." And then he turns to the chiefs and says, "Well, welcome the new Comanche to the tribe." And in the tradition, they all let off a big old hoot, holler. Well, now here comes the sad part of this story. You remember his friend up on the hill watching the other horses? I even hate to tell this part, but it's written. When he heard that hoop, he could only think of one thing. They were celebrating the death of his friend. And that Pawnee on the hill, he thought, "I can't go back without my best friend." So he pulls out a knife and kills himself. And that's the sad part of the story. But what actually happened, he stayed there a couple months. He went back, told his family what had happened to his friend and what had happened to him. He was going to go join the Comanches. And that young man became a Comanche chief of that village later when his father-in-law died. Now, here's the modern twist on this story. A few years ago, Pawnee Nation College, we hired a Comanche to be our president of the college. And I'd already read this story, and I thought, well, they've got their own stories that people wrote down. So I asked him, I said, do you have a story that parallels that story? And I told him just like I told you. He said, we sure do. Yeah, we sure do. And there was just some minor changes in some details, but virtually it was the same story, yes. And not only did he become a chief, but that marriage ended the war between the Pawnees and the northern Comanches. Now, the southern Comanches, of course, the Pawnees didn't get down there that often. So they'd been at war off and on. But this brought on a period of peace between those two ferocious tribes. And I'm glad to be able to tell that story. Well, and that's great music to follow this up with. Well, as Scott knows, I got a reputation of being a storyteller. And I know it. I accept it. So I throw down the challenge. You give me a topic, and I'll give you a story.
Ooh.
So someone out there in the vast audience, there's thousands of people here, by the way, thousands. But there's only a few up here, a few hundred up here that I can hear. Who has a topic for me?
What about the origins of the Dick Tracy stories in Pawnee?
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. We didn't get that on tape, did we? Oh, there you go. Well, yeah. Now, I wish our good friend would be here to tell it, but Chester Gould was born in 1900 in Pawnee, Oklahoma. He would grow up to be the author of Dick Tracy. He graduated in Pawnee High School. They called the school the Castle. It looked like a castle. It's not there anymore, but it was a beautiful school. You can see the old pictures from downtown. You look south, and there was a big old castle-looking high school there. And my mother went to school there. And I saw her high school graduation picture, and there were hundreds of people out in the bleachers, and everybody looked like an ant. It was so small. And one of my siblings challenged me. Oh, it might have been 120, I don't know. It was just, but they were so small. You could just barely see their faces. And he said, I bet you can't find our mother in there. And I said, I bet you I can. All I have to do is find the best looking woman there. What do you think I got my good looks? And by golly, I found her. And he picked out somebody else. So he was wrong, but I was right. Anyway. But back to Dick Tracy. He grew up in that town, and of course, it's not that old. Pawnee was born in the 1870s. When the Pawnees were brought down from Nebraska. And that's a tragic story, too, which I won't tell you now. But they came down, and of course, Dick Tracy, or Chester Gould's family was there, and he was born in 1900. By then, the Pawnees were in an industrial school there, Pawnee Industrial School, which is now Pawnee Nation College, and that's where the Pawnee Nation has their headquarters as well. Their governmental headquarters on the reserve. So he grew up with the Pawnees being there, and it became the Pawnee county seat as well. So you had the county government offices there. So it was a colorful time in history. In fact, the expert on Dick Tracy used to write little articles and talked about the first time he saw Pawnee. He was probably about 12 years old and carrying 4 rabbits and a bow and arrow. He had hunted out there at Pawnee Lake, which is where they first settled, I understand, before they moved to other areas and actually built their underground housing, roundhouses, domes, things that they had in Nebraska that could take the 40-degree below zero weather and 100-degree weather in the summer. So, but anyway, Chester Gould grew up there, graduated in 1918, and he went back east, northeast somewhere, or maybe Chicago, where it was. I'm a little rusty on the details. But he started doing that strip. And he used the local people that he remembers seeing. And you come to Pawnee, you'll see a lot of colorful people there. I just love to be out on the street when Pawnee Bill rides his horse into town. And I'll meet him out in the street. And I can always tell when a stranger drives through town because they'll do a jerk their neck back. You see Rooster Cogburn and Pawnee Bill on a horse. I'll be on foot and he'll be on horse when they just pass him through the town. So it's very colorful in that way to this day. But he named people after very colorful looking people, distinct characteristics, but we have a list at the county museum of who those people really were. One of them was called B.O. Plenty. There's about 20 or 30 characters, and I couldn't name them all. The Spotted Yellow Pony was another one, but these were named after real people. And their folks are probably still living in the area. So it was a great thing. And, of course, Dick Tracy went on to have a comic strip for a long time, made a couple of movies. And even after his death, someone kept the comic strip going and had a version where I believe it was the son of Dick Tracy who went to the moon, and there were found people up there, and he marries a moon girl, and they have a moon baby. I just love that. I haven't seen that episode in a long time, but it's out there, I'm sure. So it's just a fascinating story, and I'll tell you one more thing, and I'm going to have to shut up on Dick Tracy because the real experts are still down there in Pawnee. You have to go see the county museum. Some fine ladies run that, and they'll show you the pictures, and they'll show you the names, and it's a fine museum. It's just about 4 or 5 doors down from the Buffalo Theater, too. But the Dick Tracy story starts out with a murder, and I believe it's his father or father-in-law, and they could tell you the details on that. So they spend most of the series trying to solve that murder mystery. Now, Scott has a version that he may have also, Chester Gould, since he wrote this series during the 20s, and you know what happened in the 20s up here in Pawhuska, you want to tell them a little about it? You want me to keep?
I think you're the master here, teller of the Dick Tracy work. I'll let you work on that.
He
sir.
wants me to do all the jawing. He figures I can.
I know you can.
I'm going to
You've
take
got
a
the
drink.
history. He's going to give it all the good stuff.
Well, see, where were we? We were talking about wrapping up.
1920s.
Oh, the 1920s, of course, that's when the Osage murders took place here, and the FBI was called in. Now, I want to clear up something on this. People say this is where the FBI was born. That is true in a sense. Two things happened in the 20s. There was the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, okay? And that might have been when they formed the FBI to investigate that. But it was a fledgling little agency until they came down here. J. Edward Hoover took over, and this is what made the FBI, as far as made it to what it is today with the investigation power and stuff. And if you read any of the books, I've read a couple of them, I've seen a couple of the movies, and I even showed a couple of those movies at the Buffalo Theater. The first movie was called The FBI Story. And it's a great history, except they use fictional names for the criminals. Well, and that's because that movie came out only about 30 years after it all happened. So, but now, the new movie that's going to come out, and it's going to be shot here in Pawhuska one of these days, and it almost was last year was going to be the year that started. But there were some delays, flood, now the virus, and, other things. But it'll come. And when they have a casting call for a one-eyed fat man, I'm going to be the first one in line. Because they've already had casting calls for Pawnees and Osage Indians to play some of the parts in that movie. But I wouldn't mind playing an evil white guy. I've done a few parts like that. I played Jonathan in the play Arsenic and Old Lace. He's a Boris Karloff. You want to hear my Boris Karloff voice? Well, it goes like this. That's grandfather's laboratory. It would be a perfect operating room. Anyway, I got pretty good reviews on that play. And I've played Boris Karloff a couple times, but anyway, come to Pawnee on October. That's Serena's birthday. You might not have heard that earlier, but that's Serena, our talented singer over here. I'm going to get her on the Cush radio. Now, you Cush girls, you listen up. I'm going to be bringing her down there, and I know you're going to want her on the radio, and all those people in Tulsa and Cushing area, her phone's going to be ringing off the hook. Well, I forgot. They don't have them on the hook anymore. We used to say that growing up. Of course, I had an old crank, and this is a true story. I had to preface that sometimes because Rooster gets a little off. But we had a crank telephone out there at the funny farm. And our ring was 2 longs. And if you called one of the neighbors, you had to know what their ring was. And the rings could only be 2 shorts, a short and a long and a short, and 2 longs. And we were 2 longs. I remember that. So you would do that, and you would ring your neighbor. Now, when they got a call from outside our little party, they called it a party line. If they got a call from outside the party line, it would ring their ring. And I remember many a time, the phone would ring a short and a long. And we'd all just stand around, and somebody visiting is, aren't you going to answer the phone? No, that ain't our ring. That ain't our ring. That don't make any sense today, does it? If your phone rings, no, that's not my ring. You pick the ring you have now. But we didn't pick it. That was assigned to us. But the other thing is, if it was 1 long, we had to wait for the second long because it could have been a long short, see? So you're sitting there waiting for the second, anyway. And that was hanging up in the garage, and it was there for years. So that's the Dick Stacy story, and that's the Comanche story. I'm ready for another topic. Who's going to throw the gauntlet down?
I got a question. Didn't we have something last night? We were talking with old Doc.
Oh.
Doc Scholes. Didn't
Doc
we have
Scholes.
something really neat? You say hi to Doc. I bet Doc's
Hey, Doc,
watching.
if you're watching, and hi to DP.
Oh, yeah, DP.
DP.
Dale.
Dale. Hey, well, he and I decided we were going to call each other something different. His name is Dale, but his middle name is Peterson. And I said, I'm going to call you DP. And he said, well, I'm going to call you RC. And I just think a little while ago, well, that's 2 soft drinks, DP for Dr. Pepper and RC for Royal Crown Cola. So the next time I see my good buddy, DP, I'm going to give him a Dr. Pepper.
Ooh, yeah.
And I'll carry a little RC with me, and we'll toast each other. We had a fine time this morning, didn't we? We went out one of the highest spots here in town, or in the area, and we had a little prayer. And after I got through praying for the little breakfast we took out there, DP wanted to pray. And I thought, well, that's okay. And we did let him. And it was a fine prayer, wasn't it?
It really was.
Boy. And then I think, and it's almost teared up. the one-eyed rooster, who's pretty tough. Somebody asked him, "Did you have a fine time yesterday meeting Rooster?" And his dad was here down at the theater. See, Scott's got his own theater downstairs, a little bitty one, but it's a fine one. And he said, DP said, that was one of the greatest days. Well, he might have actually said it was the greatest day of his life. Well, folks, it's a good thing I got a patch on this one eye, because those are mighty bold words to be saying. Anyway, we're bust of friends, and he had a real spiritual experience out there on that hill. He found, and I ain't going to tell you what it is, but he found a token that's going to help him center on his spiritual quest in life. Because he's got some challenges. I ain't going to tell you what those are either. Well, not for nothing, anyway. You might have to buy me a few beers or something. No, I probably wouldn't tell you. I still wouldn't tell you. But anyway, fine young man. And his pa, oh my gosh, when the two of us get together, you can't get us to stop talking. He's got more stories. Nah, he's got as many stories as I do. But we went for hours. Everybody else left, and we were just talking to each other for hours. We got to get back together. He had hay hauling stories, and I said, well, that's all. We got to devote a whole weekend to hay hauling stories. But he's been around. He's been in the fire department. He's a fireman. And I told him, I said, well, I got a little fire story myself. If I am the editor of a fire protection publication that is read by every English-speaking country in the world, it's got my name on it. Thanks to my, I call her my baby sister, Barbara. She worked at the fire protection publications down there in Stillwater, Oklahoma, which has the world warehouse for all the publications. It's a building as big as that over there. Yes.
Hey, I don't mean to get you off track here. There was a story you told last night.
Of course you want to get me off track, but go right ahead.
You had something really interesting. You mentioned that you are a centurion, or from a family of centurions, and that you have a story about your uncle. Was it Amos?
Not Amos. Amel.
Amel.
Uncle Amel.
And there was something about a field somewhere in a Pawnee earthquake.
Well, he wants to get me on another story, folks, and I'll go ahead and oblige him, because it's a good story. Now, Uncle Amel, he's actually my half-uncle, my dad's half-brother. Finest man ever lived. Most gentle. And I said at his funeral, he didn't go to church, but I believe I know why. People go to church to become like him, to be as gentle, loving, kind. You've heard the expression, our native son used to say he never met a man he didn't like, right? Will Rogers, our native son, Will Rogers. Well, I can say this about Uncle Amel, and I did say it. He never was met by a man or a woman that didn't like him. He was just that likable and gentle. Well, he was born during the Spanish-American War in 1898, and he died in the first Gulf War in the year 2000. If you do the math, that means he lived 102 years, and through the entire 20th century. When he was born, there were no cars and there was no public radio. Well, radio had been invented, but it was still high technology and not to the general public. And they had the Stanley steamer, but they didn't have cars on the street. He plowed with mules, but they had steam engine tractors, which, by the way, let me give a shout out to the Kelly clan there in Pawnee. My mother was a Kelly, and her brother started the steam engine show. another highlight there in Pawnee every May. It got canceled this year, of course, but they call it the Steam and Gas Engine Show now. But my grandpa brought in the first John Deere dealership after plowing with those steam engines in the early part of the 20th century. But anyway, I got off, didn't I? I was talking about Uncle Emil. Well, in 1916, he was 18 years old, and he started working in the oil field. There, Watchhorn, which is about 6 miles north of where I live, and it's off near Sooner Lake. It's in Pawnee County, but close to the Arkansas River and the Osage Nation. It's close by. And when 1918 come along, the United States declares war on Germany, and I believe it was April 17th, 1917. He was drafted. And so he told me he walked 6 miles to the little schoolhouse there called the Diamond Lair School to register for the draft for World War I. Well, you know, the war ended in November 11th, 1918, and so they didn't even take him to boot camp. He got in so late, he'd been drafted, but they never really called him up for training or for service. And something similar happened in World War II. He was still in the oil field, so that kind of got him an exemption for a while. But since he was a bachelor, it might have been why he lived so long. He was a bachelor, 102. I asked him about that one time. How come you never got married? He said, well, I can barely take care of myself. Why would I want to take care of a bunch of women? Or one woman, anyway. Well, I know the real reason. When he was 12 years old, 12, he was the oldest boy in the house because his pa had already died. And Grandma had 6 of those brats running around, including my dad was a younger brother. Emil was 12, so he had to quit the 6th grade to hire himself out to earn money to pay the rent. So when he worked at the oil field, he already knew what it's like to support a family at 12. So he didn't want to do it again. He didn't want to volunteer to do it again. So that's why when he said, I can barely take care of myself, that's what he meant by that. And I understood that. Not that I experienced that, but great man. Yeah, got another question. Oh, he's giving me 10 more minutes. Well, I don't know how many stories I can tell or how you can even finish this one. But anyway, one of the greatest men that ever lived was Uncle Emil. And he died October 19th, the year 2000. And I was staying with him, actually. I got to tell you this, too. Uncle Emil, in his entire life, had only darkened the door as a patient to a hospital twice. And I bet you can't guess what year the first trip was, or how old he was. Serena, how old? My golly, that's pretty close. He was 93 years old. Now, he wasn't born in a hospital. Nobody was born in a hospital back then. You know, the first president to be born in a hospital was Jimmy Carter. And the only reason is because his dad was a medical doctor. Everybody before that was born at home. But when he was 93 years old, he went in for a minor operation, and they kept him overnight. Hemorrhoids removal. And that was his first trip. And he told me a lot of times, you don't want to go to a hospital. People die there. And so he tried to avoid them. Well, pretty good strategy. And in fact, the day he did die, I moved in with him about 8 weeks before he died. Not because there was anything wrong with him. There was nothing wrong with him. He was as strong as an ox. In fact, a few years before that, I had a wreck, and I went and stayed with him a little bit, and he was stronger than I was. And then after that, my wreck. And I'm running out of time, but
No. Is he the one that did the well shooter thing?
he did the well shooting too. I got to tell this story first. So anyway, so I got up that morning, and I had to do a murder mystery down in Ada, and that's about a 2-hour drive from Pawnee. I said, I'll see you tomorrow sometime. He said, all right. And I went, and there's dead zones. You can't, the phones don't work on the way down there. I got all the way down there, and they called, and they said he'd had a heart attack on the front porch. He went out, and he always went out. His favorite temperature was 80 degrees. He had it 80 degrees in the wintertime and 80 degrees in the summertime, and those, if you think about it, those are very uncomfortable temperatures for everybody else, but not for him. And you know, it was 80 degrees when we buried him in October. The day we buried him, it was 80 degrees. But so I get down there, and they said, well, he had a heart attack, and they found him on the porch, but they revived him. But he's in the hospital, so we better get back up here. So went up there and stood around, and they said, well, doctor said we probably need to unplug him and see if he's going to breathe on his own and all that. Well, I didn't want to do that, but he said he'll make the decision for you. It took 12 minutes for him to slowly pass. It was the most beautiful passing I'd ever seen until last year. But that's another story. But Uncle Emil was working in the oil fields in 1916, and I'm going to hurry this one up. And he had been there about a month or so. And this man come in with a wagon being pulled by a couple of mules, and everybody starts clearing out. Now, they had a well over there that they hit solid rock, and they left it, and they're drilling everywhere else. There was hundreds of wells, probably thousands maybe at one time. I don't know. But that was a well shooter. He didn't know what a well shooter was. And everybody was clearing out. Well, he was standing around. The well shooter pulls up there, and he says, I could use a man with young, strong legs like you, and I'll pay you $1. Now, $1 is pretty good wages there. He was making top wages. It was $10 a week. Top wages. But most people, if they were lucky, would get $1 a day. And he said, but I'll give you $1 just to do this one simple little thing. I'm going to tie a string on a nitroglycerin bottle. They look like a CBD bottle, and they're little bitty things. You see them in westerns, packed in straw and wood crate, the whole thing. It's exactly like that. He tied a string on it, and he let that nitroglycerin bottle down that hole, that plugged well. And it got all the way to the bottom. The string got loose, and he said, okay, Emil, you'll take that 8-foot crowbar there and sling it down that hole, and wait till I get about 50 yards out. I'll give you a signal, and then you come running as fast as you can toward me. And you'll earn that $1. So he did. He slung that down. He took off running. And I don't think he got the whole way there. I know he didn't. But that crowbar hit that nitroglycerin bottle at the bottom of that, and there was a big explosion. And that crowbar went up in the air about 100 feet. It come down and went to the ground about 3. And that well was, we call that fracking today. It was opened up, and they could put the derrick back on it, wood derricks back then, and get to pumping. Well, after that was over with, the well shooter said to Emil, I could use a man like you. I'll pay you, remember now, he's making $10 a week. I'll pay you $25 a week, and you'll only have to do what you just did probably 3 or 4 times. The rest of the time, we're in the wagon just moving from field to field. And that's a pretty easy job for $25 a week. Emil said, well, I'd sure like to, but dang it. I'm only working 12 hours a day, and I farm in my spare time with my folks living nearby here, and I'd be gone too much. Who'd be taking care of the farm and the other kids? Remember, he's still taking care of the kids when he's 18. So I'll have to turn that down. He said, well, if you change your mind, You get the word out in the oil patch, and I'll hear about it. He said, all right, standing offer. So they went back to work building that derrick, and the oil shooter starts taking off, and he gets about a quarter mile. There's a little bridge there that he has to cross, an old rickety bridge. And there's this huge explosion. They knew what it was. He'd hit a bump on that bridge, shook that nitro. And all they found was a piece of mule, a thumb, and maybe a little bit of that wagon. They said only a piece of thumb was all they found to bury. I don't know if they buried him there or not. If he had taken that job, I wouldn't be telling this story. It'd be a different version of that story, for sure. Well, okay, I'm going to wrap this up. 100 years later, that was a 1916. Well, in 2016, Pawnee had the biggest earthquake in Oklahoma history. 5.8, they upgraded it to 5.9. Now, they put Pawnee as the epicenter, but it's not really Pawnee. That was just the nearest town. I looked it up, and you can look it up. It happened in the Watchhorn oil field, 6 miles north of me. And my buddy Scott and over here, we're going to find out if it's actually the exact spot where that well was shot. 100 years, and maybe even to the month. Now, wouldn't that be a coincidence? Our buddy, Doc Scholes, I told him some coincidence stories. Wouldn't that be a wonderful coincidence if it happened on the same day as when my uncle threw that crowbar down that well? More later with Rambling with Rooster. I'm going to turn it over back to Scott.
Oh, hang, stay there. I like that. Rambling with Rooster.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
That's a lot better than the rooster tail I was trying to
Yeah, he's
mess
grabbing
with.
my tail.
Rambling with Rooster. I like
Yeah.
that a lot better. Guys, thank you. We're going to try and do this every week best we can and try to bring a little bit more entertainment music to the streets of Pawhuska, and here with Rooster and Serena and everybody else we can possibly
And
bring
text
in.
in a story.
You bet. Bring it in. We'll sit there
I'll
and talk
throw
about
the gauntlet down for that.
it. There you go. Sound like a winner. Folks,
Here you go.
thank you all. We'll see
Have
you
a good
soon.
evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.